Hello everyone, this is chapter 1 of Mice and Men. A few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. The water is warm too, for it has slipped twinkling over the yellow sands in the sunlight before reaching the narrow pool. On one side of the river, the golden foothill slopes curve up to the strong and rocky Galaban Mountains. But on the valley side, the water is lined with trees, willows fresh and green with every spring, carrying in their lower leaf junctures and debris of the winter's flooding, and sycamores with molted white recumbent limbs and branches that arch over the pool. On the sandy bank under the trees that the leaves lie deep and so crisp that a lizard makes a great skittering if he rungs among them. Rabbits come out of the brush just to sit on the sand in the evening, and the damp flats are covered with the night tracks of coons, and the spread pads of dogs from the ranches, and with the split wedge tracks of deer that come to drink in the dark. There is a path through the willows and among the sycamores, a path beaten hard by boys coming down from the ranches to swim in the deep pool, and beaten hard by tramps who come wearily down from the highway in the evening to jungle up near water. And from the low horizontal limb of a giant sycamore there is an ash pile made up of many fires. The limb is worn smooth by men who have sat on it. Evening of a hot day started the little wind to moving among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills towards the top, and on the sandbanks the rabbits sat as quietly as the little gray sculpture stones. And then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps on the crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noisily for cover. A silted Herod labored up into the air and pounded down the river. For a moment the place was lifeless, and then 2 grown men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. They had walked in single file from the path, and even in the opening, one stayed behind the other. Both were dressed in denim trousers and denim coats with brass buttons. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried tight blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. The first man was a small man, but quick, dark of the face and restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Every part of him was defined: small, strong hands, slender arms, a thin and bony nose. Behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large pale eyes, with wide sloping shoulders, and he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but they hung loosely. The first man stopped short of the clearing, and the other, following nearly, ran him over when he stopped. He took off his hat, wiped a sweatband from his forefinger, and snapped the moisture off. His huge companion dropped his blankets, flung himself down, and drank from the surface of the green pool. He drank with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. The small man stepped nervously beside him. "Lenny," he said sharply. "Oh, Lenny, for gosh sakes, don't drink so much." Lenny continued to snort into the pool. The small man leaned over and shook him by the shoulder. "Lenny, you're going to be sick as you were last night." Lenny dipped his whole head under, hat and all. Then he sat up on the bank, and his hat dripped down on the blue coat and ran down his back. That's good," he said. You should drink some, George. You take a big drink." He smiled happily. George unslung his bindle and dropped it gently on the bank. "I ain't sure it's even good water," he said. "It looks kind of scummy to me." Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water and wiggled his fingers so that the water arose in little splashes. Rings widened across the pool to the other side and came back again. Lenny watched them go. Look, George, look what I've done." George knelt beside the pool and drank from his hand with a quick scoops. "All right, I guess it tastes all right," he admitted. "Don't really seem to be running, though. You never ought to drink water that ain't running, Lenny," he said hopelessly. "Aw, man, you'd drink out of a gutter if you were thirsty, though, wouldn't you?" He threw a scoop of water onto his face, rubbed it with his hand under his chin and around the back of his neck. Then he replaced his hat, pushed himself back for the river, drew up his knees, and embraced them. Lenny, who had been watching, imitated George exactly. He pushed himself back, drew up his knees, embraced them, and looked over to George to see whether or not it was just right. He pulled his hat down a little more over his eyes, just the way George's hat was. George stared morosely at the water. The ribs of his eyes were red with sun glare. He said angrily, "We could just as well road clear the ranch if that dumb bus driver knew what he was talking about." "Oh, just a little scratch down the highway," he says. "Just a little stretch. Gosh darn near 4 miles we just had to walk. That's what that was. Didn't want to stop at the ranch games. That's what that was. Too gosh darn lazy to pull up. No wonder he isn't too darn good to stop and sold at all. He kicks us out and says, 'Oh, just a little stretch down the road.' I bet it was 4 miles we just walked. And a darn hot day we walked too." Lenny looked timidly over at him. "George?" "Yeah, what do you want?" "Where are we going, George?" The little man jerked down the brim of his hat and scowled over at Lenny. "So you forgot already, did you?" "Man, I gotta tell you again, don't I?" "Jeez, you're such a crazy fool." I forgot," Lenny said softly. I tried not to forget. Honest to God, I did, George." Okay, I'll tell you. But I ain't got nothing to do. Might just as well spend all my time telling you things, and then you just forget them, and then you'll just have to tell you again. "Oh, I tried and tried," said Lenny, "but it didn't do no good. But I remember about the rabbits, George. I remember that." "Oh, the heck with those rabbits. That's all you could ever do is remember them rabbits." "Okay. Now you listen, and this time you got to remember so we don't get in no trouble. You remember sitting in that gutter on Howard Street and watching the blackboard?" Lenny's face broke into a delightful smile. Why, sure, George. Yes, I remember that. But what did we do?" "I remember some girls come by and you say, 'The heck with what I says. You remember us going to Murray and Reddy's and they gave us work cards and bus tickets." Oh, sure, George. I remember that." His hands went quickly to his side pockets. He then said gently, "George, oh no, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it." He looked down at the ground in despair. "Oh, you never had one, you crazy fool. I got both of them here. You think I'd honestly let you carry your own work card?" Lenny grinned with relief. I thought I put it in my side pocket." His hand went into his pocket again. George looked sharply at him. "What did you take out of that pocket just now?" "Oh, I ain't take a thing, George. Honestly." "I know there ain't. You just put it in your pocket. Now, what do you got in your hand? Are you hiding it from me?" "No, I ain't got nothing, George. Honest." "Come on. Give it here." Lenny held his hand close away from George's direction. "It's only a mouse, George." "A mouse? You have a live mouse?" Oh, no, just a dead mouse, George. But I didn't kill it. Honest, I found it dead." "Give it here," said George. "Oh, please let me have it, George." "Give it here." Lenny's closed hand slowly obeyed. George took the mouse and he threw it across the pool to the other side among the brush. "What do you want a dead mouse for anyways?" "Oh, I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along," said Lenny. "Well, you ain't petting no mice while you walk with me. You remember where we're going now?" Lenny looked startled and then said in embarrassment. He hit his face against his knees. "Oh, I think I forgot again." "Oh, jeez," George said resignedly. "Well, okay, we're going to work on a ranch like the one we just come from up north." "Up north?" "In Weed." "Oh, sure, I remember. Yes, in Weed." "That ranch we're going to is right there about a quarter mile. We're going to go in and we're going to see the boss. Now, look, I'll give him the work tickets, but you ain't going to say a word. You just stand there and you don't say nothing. If he finds out what a crazy fool you are, we're not going to get no job. But if he sees your work before he hears you talk, well, I think we'll be set. You got that?" "Oh, sure, George. Sure, I got that." "All right. Now, when we get to the bus, what are you going to do?" Lenny thought. His face grew tight with thought. I ain't going to say nothing, okay? I'm just going to stand there." "Good boy. That's swell. You say that over 2-3 times and you might just sure won't forget it." Lenny droned to himself softly. "I ain't going to say nothing. I ain't going to say nothing. I ain't going to say nothing." "Okay," said George. "And you ain't going to do no bad things like you done on Weed either, right?" Lenny looked puzzled. "Like I done in Weed?" "Oh, so you forgot that too, did you? Well, I ain't going to remind you of that for you to do it again." A light of understanding broke on Lenny's face. "Oh, yeah, they run us out of Weed." He exploded triumphantly. "Run us out, heck," said George disgustedly. "We won, and they came looking for us. But they didn't catch us, did they?" Lenny giggled happily. "Oh, no, I didn't forget that. You bet, George." George lay back on the sand and crossed his hands under his head. Lenny imitated him once again, raising his head to see whether or not he was doing it right. "Gosh, you're a lot of trouble," said George. "I could get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have to have you on my tail. I could live so easy. Heck, I could maybe even have a girl." For a moment, Lenny lay quiet. Then he said hopefully, "Are we going to work on a ranch, George?" "All right, at least you got that, but we're going to sleep here because I got a reason." The day was going fast now. Only the tops of the Gallivan mountains flamed with the light of the sun that had gone from the valley. A water snake slipped along the pool, its head helped up like a little periscope. The reeds jerked slightly in the current. Far off towards the highway, a man shouted something and another man looked back. The sycamore winds rustled under a little wind that died immediately. "George, why were they not going to the ranch to get some supper? They've probably got supper at the ranch." George yelled on his side. "No reason at all for you. I just like it here. Tomorrow we're going to go to work. I've seen thrashing machines on the way, and that means we're going to be bucking grain bags and busting a gut. So tonight I'm going to lay right here and look up. I like it here." Lenny got up on his knees and looked down at George. "Ain't we going to have no supper?" "Sure we are. If you gather up some dead willow sticks, I got 3 cans of beans in my bindle. You get a fire ready, and I'll give you a match when you get the sticks together. Then we'll eat the beans and have some supper." Lenny said, "I like my beans with ketchup, George." "Well, we ain't got no ketchup, so you go get the wood, and don't you fool around. It'll be dark before long." Lenny lumbered to his feet, disappeared in the brush. George lay where he was and whistled softly to himself. There were sounds of splashing down the river in the direction Lenny had taken. George stopped whistling and said, "Ah, poor fool," he said softly to himself, and then he started whistling again. In a moment, Lenny came back through the brush. He carried one small willow stick in his hand, and George sat up. "All right," he said brusquely, "you give me that mouse." But Lenny made an elaborate pantomime of innocence. "What mouse, George? I ain't got no mouse." George held his hands. "Come on, give it to me. You ain't pulling nothing over on me, Lenny." Lenny hesitated, backed away, looked wildly at the brush line as though he contemplated running for freedom. George said coldly, "You're going to give me that mouse, or do I have to sock you one?" "Give you what, George?" "You know gosh darn well that I want that mouse." Lenny reluctantly reached into his pocket. His voice broke a little. "I don't know why I can't keep it. It ain't nobody else's mouse. I didn't steal it. I found it lying beside the road." George's hand remained outstretched imperiously. Slowly, like a terrier who doesn't want to bring a ball to its master, Lenny approached. He drew back, and he approached again. George snapped his fingers sharply, and at that sound, Lenny laid the mouse in his hand. "I wasn't doing anything bad with it, George. I was just stroking it." George stood up, threw the mouse as far as he could into the darkening brush, and then he stepped to the pool and washed his hand. "You crazy fool! Don't you think I could see your feet was wet when you went across the river to get it?" He heard Lenny whimpering and crying and wheeled about. "Aw, man, look at you. You're blubbering like a baby." "Ah, geez, a big guy like you, too." Lenny's lips quivered and tears started in his eyes. "Ah, Lenny." George put his hand on Lenny's shoulder. "I ain't taking away from you out of meanness, but that mouse ain't fresh, Lenny. And besides, you broke it petting it, and you'll get another mouse that's fresh, and I'll let you keep that for a while, okay?" Lenny sat down on the ground and hung his head dejectedly. I don't know where there is going to be no other mouse. I remember a lady used to give them to me every one she got, but that lady ain't here no more." George scoffed. "Lady, huh? You don't even remember who that lady was, do you? That was your own Aunt Clara, and she stopped giving them to you because you always killed them, Lenny." Lenny looked up sadly up to him. "They was just so little," he said apologetically. "I'd pet them, and pretty soon they would bite my fingers, so I'd pinch their little heads, and then they was dead. Because they was so little, George." "Well, I wish we'd get rabbits pretty soon, George. They ain't so little." "Nah, the heck with rabbits. Ain't you? And you ain't to be trusted with no lot of mice either. Your Aunt Claire give you a rubber mouse, and you wouldn't have nothing to do with that." "It wasn't no good to pet those," said Lenny. The flame of the sunset lifted from the mountaintops, and the dust came into the valley, and a half-darkness came in among the willows and the sycamores. A big carp rose to the surface of the pool, gulped air, and then sank mysteriously into the dark water again, leaving a widening rings of the water. Overhead, the leaves whisked again, and little puffs of willow caught and blew down and landed on the pool's surface. "You going to get that wood?" George demanded. "There's plenty up right there at the back of the sycamore. Floodwater wood. Now you go off and get it, all right?" Lenny went behind the tree and brought out a litter of dried leaves and twigs. He threw them in a heap on the old ash pile and went back for more and more. It was almost night now. A dove's wings whistled over the water. George walked to the fire pit, lit the dry leaves. The flame cracked up among the twigs and fell to work. George undid his bindle and brought out 3 cans of beans. He stood them by the fire, close in against the blaze, but not quite touching the flame. "There's enough beans here for 4 men, George said. Lenny watched him over the fire. He said patiently, I like them with ketchup, George." "Well, we ain't got any," George exploded. "Oh, man, whatever we ain't got, that's what you want. Gosh almighty, if I was alone, I could live so easy. I could go get a job and work and have no trouble. I'd have no mess at all. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go into town and get whatever I want. Why, I could stay in a cat house all night if I wanted to. I could eat any place I wanted. I could go to any hotel I wanted. And I could order any darn thing I could think of. And I could do that every darn month. I could get a gallon of whiskey, or I could get a pool room and play cards or shoot pool." Lenny knelt and looked over at the fire, at the angry George, and Lenny's face was drawn with terror. "And what do I got instead?" George went on furiously. "I got you! You can't keep a job, and you lose me every job I get. You just keep me shoving all over the country all the time, and that ain't the worst part. You get in trouble. You do bad things, and then I gotta get you out." His voice rose nearly to a shout. "You crazy SOB! You keep me in hot water all the time." He took on the elaborate manner of little girls when they get mimicking one another. "Oh, I just wanted to feel that girl's dress. Oh, I just wanted to pet it like it was a mouse. Well, how the heck did she know you just wanted to feel her dress? She jerks back and you hold on like it was a mouse. She then yells and we got to hide in an irrigation ditch all day with guys looking for us. And we got to sneak out in the dark and get the heck out of the country. And all the time something like that, all the time that keeps happening. Man, I wish I could just put you in a cage with 1,000,000 mice and just let them have fun." His anger left him suddenly. He looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face. And then he looked ashamedly at the flames. It was quite dark now, but the fire lighted the trunks of the trees and the curving branches overhead. Lenny crawled slowly and cautiously around the fire until he was close to George. He sat back on his heels, and George turned the bean can so that another side faced him. He pretended to be unaware of Lenny so close behind him. "George?" Very softly, but no answer. "George? What do you want?" "I was just fooling, George. I don't even want no ketchup. I wouldn't eat no ketchup if it was right there beside me." "Lenny, if we had it, you could have some." "But I wouldn't eat none, George. I would leave it all for you. You could cover your beans with it, and I wouldn't touch none of it." George still stared morosely at the fire. "When I think of the swell time I'd have without you, I go nuts. I never get no peace." Lenny still knelt. He looked over in the darkness across the river. "George, if you want, I could go away and leave you alone." "Where the heck would you even go?" "Well, I could go off to the hills there, find some place in a cave or something." "Yeah? And what would you eat? You ain't got enough sense to find nothing to eat." "Oh, I find things, George. I don't need no nice food with ketchup. I just lay out in the sun and nobody would hurt me. And if I found a mouse, I would keep it, and nobody would take it away from me." George looked quickly, searchingly at him. "I've been mean, ain't I? If you don't want me here, I can go off to the hills and find a cave. I could go away any time." "No, look, I was just fooling with you, Lenny, okay? Because I want you to stay with me. See, trouble with mice is you always kill them. But I'll tell you what I'll do, Lenny. First chance I get, I'm going to get you a puppy, okay? Maybe you won't kill that. That'll be better than a mouse, at least. And then you could pet it a little harder, okay?" Lenny avoided the bait, though. He had sensed his advantage. "If you don't want me, all you got to do is say so, and I'll go up to the hills right there, right up on those hills where I live by myself. And I won't get no mice stole from me either." George said, I want you to stay with me, Lenny. Jeez. Somebody'd shoot you for a coyote if you were by yourself. No, you'll stay with me. Your Aunt Claire wouldn't like you running off by yourself, either. She is dead. Lenny spoke craftily. Tell me like you done before, George. Tell you what? About the rabbits, George. George snapped. Man, you ain't going to pull nothing over on me. Lenny pleaded. Come on, George. Tell me, please, George, like you done before. You get a kick out of that story, don't you? All right, I'll tell you, and then we're going to eat our supper, okay? George's voice came deeper. He repeated the words rhythmically as though he had said them many a times before. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. We got no family, and they don't belong no place. They come to a ranch and work up a stake, and then they go into town and blow their stake, and the next thing you know, they're pounding on the tail of some other ranch. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to. Lenny was delighted. That's it. That's it. Now tell how it is with us. George went on. With us, it ain't like that. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a darn about us. We don't have to sit in no bar room blowing in our jack just because we got no place else to go. And if those other guys gets in jail, they can rot in there for any, because nobody gives a darn about them, but not us. Lenny broke in. But not us? And why? Because I got you to look after me, and you got you to look after, and me to look after you, and that's why. He laughed delightedly. Go on, George. Keep telling it. You got it by heart anyways. You could just tell it yourself. No, George. I forget some of the things. Tell me how it's going to be. Okay. Well, someday we're going to get that jack together, and we're going to have a little house and a couple of acres of a cow and some pigs, and we're going to live off the fat of the land, Lenny shouted, and have rabbits. Go on, George. Tell about how we're going to have the garden, about the rabbits in the cages, and about the rain in the winter, and the stove, and how thick the cream is, and the milk like you can hardly cut it. Tell about that, George. Why don't you do it yourselves? You know all of it. No. You tell it, George. It ain't the same if I tell it. Go on, George. How I can tend the rabbits? Well, said George, we'll have a big vegetable patch and a rabbit hutch and chickens. And when it rains in the winter, we'll just say, to heck with it, going to work. We'll build up a fire in the stove and sit around and just listen to the rain coming down on the roof. Nuts. He took out his pocket knife. I ain't got no more time. He drove his knife through the top of the bean can, sawed the top, and passed the can to Lenny. Then he opened a second can, and from the side pocket, he brought out 2 spoons and passed one to Lenny. They sat there by the fire and filled their mouths with beans and chewed mightily. A few beans slipped out of his side of Lenny's mouth. George gestured with his spoon. What are you going to say tomorrow when the boss asks you questions? Lenny stopped chewing and swallowed. His face was concentrated. I ain't going to say a word, George. Good boy. That's mighty fine, Lenny. Maybe you are getting better. When we get that couple acres, I can let you tend the rabbits all night. Lenny choked up with pride. Oh, I can remember, George, he said. George motioned with his spoon again. Look, Lenny, I want you to look around this place, okay? You can remember this place, can't you? The ranch is about a quarter mile up the road that way. Just follow the river. Oh, sure, said Lenny. I can remember this. Didn't I remember not to say a word? Of course you did, Lenny. Well, look. If just so happen you get in trouble again like you've done before, I want you to come right back here and hide in this brush. Do you understand? Hide in the brush, said Lenny slowly. Hide in the brush till I come for you. Can you remember that? Sure I can, George. Hide in the brush till you come. But you ain't going to get in no trouble, because if you do, I'm not going to let you tend the rabbits. He threw his empty can off in the brush. I won't get in no trouble, George. I ain't going to say a word. Okay. You bring your bindle over here by the fire. It's going to be nice sleeping here, looking up in the leaves. Don't build no fire no more. We'll let her die down. They made their beds on the sand, and as the blaze dropped from the fire, the spear of the light grew smaller, the curling branches disappeared, and only a faint glimmer showed where the tree trunks were. From the darkness, Letty called out, George, are you asleep? No. What do you want? Let's have a different color rabbits, George. Sure we will. Red and blue and green rabbits, Lenny. Millions of them. Furry ones, George, like I see in the fair in Sacramento. Sure we'll have furry ones. Because I just as well, I'll go away, George, and I'll live in a cave. You could just as well go to heck, said George. Now shut up. The red light dimmed on in the coals. Up in the hills from the river, a coyote yammered, and a dog answered from the other side of the stream. and the sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze. Ladies and gentlemen, that is chapter 1. I want you to think about our two characters. This is definitely, more than anything, the theme of the story is friendship, and I want you to think about how different these two characters are. There's actually a character type about it. They are such opposites. I want you to think about that, and we'll talk about more of this more soon. Take care, everybody.